California, and specifically Los Angeles, where Hollywood is, has been a big problem for Republicans. And President Trump was able to make significant inroads in that state. And honestly, given the wildfires that are ravaging the state right now, there's a lot of criticism of the current Democratic leadership in that state.
President Biden, who, well, he's left the White House, hasn't he? I mean, with this warning to Americans.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before, more than a century ago. But the American people stood up to the robber barons back then and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy, just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to. Workers want rights to earn their fair share. You know, they were dealt into the deal, and it helped put us on a path to building the largest middle class, the most prosperous century any nation in the world has ever seen. And we've got to do that again. In the last 4 years, that is exactly what we've done. People should be able to make as much as they can, but play by the same rules, pay their fair share of taxes. I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
With that warning in mind, well, President-elect Donald Trump is now just days away from returning to the White House as the 47th President of the United States, with confirmation hearings for his team well underway. Well, here to talk us through what we can expect from these next few days is the Hill's Julia Manchester. Julia, let's start off with President Biden warning Americans about the oligarchy taking shape. How concerned will they be at what he said, and how seriously will they take it?
Well, look, I think there is certainly concern much on the political left. And, look, Donald Trump was referring to a few people without naming them, or excuse me, Joe Biden was referring to a few people without naming them. Elon Musk comes to mind, obviously the SpaceX and X CEO and founder, someone who has become buddy in chief, if you will, to President Trump. He's at his side, oftentimes at Mar-a-Lago. There's reports that he could get an office space, for example, in the Eisenhower Executive Building. So, there is this sense that these unelected officials are having this influence on the president-elect, and that's creating concern among the president-elect's critics. You also have Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO and founder of Meta and Facebook. He recently, that company announced it was doing away with its fact-checking process and was going to adopt a strategy in terms of, information filtration, if you will. It's more similar to X. We know that Zuckerberg is throwing an inauguration party. Meta has donated to Trump's inaugural fund. It is clear that he is trying to get some of this influence as well. And we saw that in those same comments, Trump did call out Zuckerberg without naming him, talking about companies doing away with fact checking. So a lot of this comes down to these, oftentimes tech million and billionaires who are trying to curry favor with the president-elect.
Right. I'm just looking at the White House's website, and I see President Biden, and he said this in his speech yesterday, touting his record, historically strong and broadly shared recovery, most pro-Labor president in history, building a fairer tax system, increased housing for Americans, small businesses, the engines of the economy. And some on the left have said he's a consequential president, unfairly maligned. But how do you think America more generally sees it? Because, of course, the verdict that they gave at the ballot box in November wasn't just on Kamala Harris, it was also on him, wasn't it?
It was because Kamala Harris represented the Biden agenda. She was his vice president, and she in her messaging was able to unable, I should say, to differentiate herself from the President Biden. It was difficult for her because her name is on all of his achievements when he was in office. Look, President Biden is leaving office with very low approval ratings, some going from 36 to 38%, some to 40%. That being said, though, presidents' approval ratings and their post-presidency do get higher, after the fact. So, for example, here in America, we celebrated the life of former President Jimmy Carter. Like Joe Biden, he was a one-term Democratic president, a president who dealt with a hostage crisis, as well as sky-high inflation. And after Jimmy Carter took office, I think his critics were very quick to call him a failure. But in his post-presidency, he did a lot of humanitarian work. He continued the humanitarian work he was doing during his presidency. And in those decades after, he was very much able to rebuild his brand and become more popular. You've seen a similar, situation play out with George W. Bush. Left being very unpopular following the Iraq War and the financial crisis of 2008. But now he's mostly stayed out of politics, and he's actually quite popular with most Americans, including Democrats. So a lot of these presidents are judged in their post-presidency. What makes Biden different from Carter or W. Bush is that he's in his early 80s. We don't know how much more of a post-presidency he will see.
Yeah, sure. And talking of the fag end of his presidency, he's made a weird announcement. I say weird because we expected TikTok to be banned effectively from the 19th of January. But his office is now saying it's not going to enforce the change in the law. And one wonders what President-elect Trump will do when he comes to office.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was chatting with our tech reporter at The Hill, and they were essentially telling me a lot of the guidance is very unclear as to what happens to TikTok, assuming it is banned on the 19th or the 20th. A lot of guidance hasn't been given out by the company. It's unclear whether the app will just go dark, whether we just won't be able to see new content anymore. We don't know what that will look like. But, I think there's been, a lot of backlash to the decision to ban it and the push to ban it, despite what many say are national security risks when it comes to TikTok. You saw the Biden campaign when he was running for president, the Harris campaign after that, and then, of course, the Trump campaign both embraced TikTok to try to reach voters, particularly young voters. So you've seen campaigns in many ways embrace it after the official side of things has called for a ban. So Trump has seems to have come out against the ban. We know that the CEO of TikTok is going to be in Washington next week for the the incoming Trump administration. So that will be fascinating. But we don't really know what's going to happen because we're just not getting any clear answers. We don't know what a potential initial ban would even look like.
Well, we will find out, I'm sure, in the coming days, Julia. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Times Radio. That's The Hill's Julia Manchester.
Rick, I think I want to kind of consider the transition, first of all, and how you would assess the Trump administration transition. Has it really set the tone, the mood, the direction for Trump 2.0?
Absolutely. I think the difference between the current transition and the previous transition in his first term is that President Trump learned an incredible amount about how government works or doesn't work, and has really applied that knowledge to this cycle. He has been much more intense in naming his appointments. He is far further along in naming key cabinet appointments, ambassadors, and other ranking officials in our government. And more importantly, he's actually been working on policy initiatives over the course of, the last year and a half leading up to this. And so that is a major difference. So on day one, you are going to see a bevy of what we call executive orders, which allows a president to begin work immediately. And you're going to see probably about 100 of those on the first day, which he likes to call shock and awe. And it's going to be a phenomenal day to watch to see how each of these impacts our country, but also how much it pertains to his agenda and how quickly he'll be able to get those points through.
How important is this inaugural address to be? Now, these are often speeches that make history, and I'm quite taken by the idea that Trump has to land a message for a second term, obviously not a consecutive second term. And I just wonder how he does that. Other presidents going into a second term will build on what they've done in the previous 4 years. Should he do that, or does he need distance from term one?
No, I think he needs. I think he needs some distance in terms of what he has outlined in his agenda. I think part of his agenda was stifled by the bureaucracy of government the last time. This time, I think he has the benefit of knowing that he's only going to be in one term. So you have a tendency to act much faster and more effectively, knowing that you don't really have a second term to rely on to maybe finish the work that you were unable to do in the first term. So he is going to move very quickly. I think that you're going to see an inaugural address that is very authentic to him. And what I mean by that, it's going to be very policy laden. I think that he is going to make sure that he hits those key points of what he's going to do in the first 100 days. And I don't think he's going to pull punches. He never does. And I don't think he's going to do that in this case. A lot of presidents talk a lot about populism and a lot of rhetoric that they never actually execute or implement on. You're not going to see that from President Trump in this speech.
What of policy? Is he being serious when he does things like talks about Greenland, owning Greenland? When he talks, even in the last few hours, appointing Mel Gibson, John Voight, and Sylvester Stallone as ambassadors to make Hollywood bigger, better, and stronger. Special envoys these three are going to be to Hollywood, which he describes as a great but very troubled place. Are these serious? These feel almost a bit superficial. These suggestions.
No, yeah, I think, the mainstream media likes to look at him that way, but this is where he's been very creative. I mean, no other Republican president has done this other than Ronald Reagan, who had direct contact with Hollywood. But look, California and specifically Los Angeles, where Hollywood is, has been a big problem for Republicans. And President Trump was able to make significant inroads in that state. And honestly, given the wildfires that are ravaging the state right now, there's a lot of criticism of the current Democratic leadership in that state. And I think President Trump sees an opportunity, a window to be able to talk to Californians and maybe potentially show them how a better, more effective government can actually help them. So absolutely, I think that is a really good strategy. He's also created an organization called the External Revenue Service, which is going to be designed to go after tariffs and other foreign income that our country hasn't been very good at collecting in the past. So all these differences you see, I know they're kind of out of the box, and people might think that they're humorous or they're not serious. But I would absolutely disagree with that. I think you're going to see some very interesting components to this administration, largely because, like I said, he's learned a lot more in implementing what he's learned this time around.
Rick, I want to just ask, if I may, a little bit about your own connection, your own history, relationship with President Trump. I know that you did some jail time actually for issues around the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Your co-defendant was Paul Manafort, the Trump campaign manager. He was pardoned, and I just want to kind of consider Trump's view on pardons. This could define his first day as well when it comes to pardoning the 6th of January rioters. I just wonder what your take is on where you sit in that story, but then also where the January the 6th rioters may sit in just a few days' time.
Yeah, I think what we saw with Russiagate was really a weaponization of the justice system. We labeled it lawfare over the last cycle, and I think that President Trump wants to end that. And I think to a large extent, a number of the January 6 rioters or, protesters, some people call them patriots, whatever you want to label them, that their sentences were absolutely unfair.
Correct.
And you can look at that and see that across the board. So I think the president needs to honor his commitment to what he said he was going to do. But I also think he has to measure that with some of these individuals actually committed serious crimes, and you can't uphold the rule of law if you're not going to enforce that aspect. So I think you're going to see probably a significant number of those people pardoned because they were treated unfairly. But then it'll be interesting to see if he pardons them all in a blanket pardon, or if he kind of categorizes them and doesn't necessarily pardon all of them. Maybe he commutes some sentences, maybe he reduces it. But we'll have to see. Only he knows what he's going to do at this moment.
Yeah, sure. So then perhaps there's the necessity for a bit more nuance rather than just a sweeping pardon across the board, which is interesting. I suppose the other question I want to ask you is about Joe Biden's outgoing comment. Do you believe America is sliding towards oligarchy? That felt like some sort of nudge in the direction of Trump, some of those he's gathering around him, whether those are many, many billionaires that are floating around in the shape of Elon Musk or who are being appointed to cabinet positions as well. Is America becoming an oligarchy?
I don't think that America is becoming any different than it was, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in power. Joe Biden had as many wealthy billionaires around him as Donald Trump did. I mean, Joe Biden stayed in a lot of their houses on his vacations, which is, again, not uncommon for any president to do. But I think it's the type and caliber of people. We talk here in the United States about under what scenario could you have ever seen a situation where you have President Trump, Elon Musk, Robert Kennedy, and those types of individuals all together. And so I think it's given our country a new sense of energy. I think people are very excited about the potential for change. It's just going to be a question of whether he's able to implement, all of his agenda, some of his agenda, or if Congress becomes an obstacle to that. That's going to be, I think, very interesting to watch over the next couple months.
Really good to speak to you, Rick. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.